Welcome to the Hockey Writers Maple Leafs Lounge, a weekly show from our Toronto Maple Leafs writing crew, bringing you the latest news, rumors, trades, player grades, prospects, and much more. From training camp to the playoffs, from draft day to the trade deadline, our team covers everything that happens with the blue and white. Come on in and pull up a chair. Welcome to the Maple Leafs Lounge.
Hello and welcome back to the Maple Leafs Lounge. I am your host, Peter Baracchini, and as always, I'm joined by my colleagues and fellow Maple Leaf writers over at the Hockey Writers, Spencer Lazary and Jim Parsons. Guys, before we get into the Leaf talk, there's a lot to get into in terms of free agency, trade speculation, what have you, even the draft. But first, Spencer, how are you doing this week?
I'm good. A little sick, but good.
We hope you feel better. Again, if you need to, take a sip of water, what have you, do what you need to do. Hopefully you feel better very, very soon. Jim, how are you doing? I know today was a very busy and hectic one as we were talking off camera before we started.
Yeah, no, today I'm more I'm more pumped. I'm more juiced than Spencer sounds. It does sound like he's not feeling for me, but I am excited because there's been tons of action already today, which is good because that means there's going to be a lot more action heading into the draft, which is coming right around the corner, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. Bunches of trades, some signings, all sorts of fun stuff happening. So I've been busy. It's been good.
And let's get right into it. Obviously, the biggest news this week was the fact that, it seems like there was a mass exodus of players were sending in their trade requests when Daryl Sutter was still the head coach. They canned him. Players rescinded that. But now you're still seeing, players wanting out of Calgary. And the latest name to fall is, of course, Tyler Toffoli. Had a phenomenal season in 82 games, 73 points. I believe that led the team in scoring, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. Yes, he led the team in scoring and goals, 34, 73 in total. Obviously, it was a season of highs and lows for the Flames. They didn't have the effort or the result that they wanted. They lost Matthew Tkachuk, lost Johnny Gaudreau. Jonathan Huberdeau wasn't that great. Mackenzie Weegar was probably one of the bright spots along with Toffoli, Lindholm, and even Jacob Markstrom. But now that he's, essentially telling himself, I want to be out of here. I'm not going to sign an extension. This is huge news. Jim, obviously, is this something that the Maple Leafs should pursue given how Brad Treliving is now the GM of the Maple Leafs?
Yeah, it's interesting that you see so many conversations potentially between Calgary and Toronto now that Treliving's moved on from one location to another. And then you might think, well, maybe they won't do trades, but you don't know what Craig Conroy and Brad Treliving might be thinking and doing. The simple answer to your question is sure. The Toronto Maple Leafs should absolutely look at this. In fact, I would think that 25 teams should look at this. Tyler Toffoli is a pretty good player. He makes decent money. He's got 1 year left on his contract. He just scored 31 goals. He shouldn't have been the leading scorer in Calgary. That probably should have gone to Jonathan Huberdeau, but Jonathan Huberdeau didn't have a very good year. So Tyler Toffoli picked it up. He played really, really well. He's a first unit power play guy. He's got a lot that you might like if you're Toronto. In fact, here in Edmonton, where I cover the team too, I would absolutely think the Oilers should go after Tyler Toffoli. So there's a lot of things to like about Toffoli. So if Dubas was running this team, this would have been a trade I think he'd be all over. And somehow he probably would have pulled it off and had Calgary retain some salary and gotten Toffoli at like a $3.5 to $3 million. That's the kind of deal Dubas would have done. I don't know if Treliving is going to do that sort of thing. We'll see. He hasn't really made any major moves yet in Toronto, but I absolutely would look at him. I think a lot of teams should.
Spencer, looking at the underlying analytics, he was top 10 in shot attempts for 58.58%, but he was second to only Michael Backlund in goals for percentage, 61.05. Backlund had 61.36, on for 58, 37 against at 5-on-5. Believe it was a minimum of 250 minutes that I played for those categories. Scoring chances are high danger chances are pretty high. Obviously, is this, a player that would thrive in the Maple Leaf system as, that top 6 forward that they've been longing to add for some time?
Yeah, I think so. The only question to me would be if he's on the line with John Tavares and William Nylander, say, would he take time or take puck time away from Nylander, who seems to strive with the puck on his stick. But even if you put him on the third line, I still think that, 31 goals, even if he gets 25, that's still more than what Toronto had from the third line last year. So I do think that it would be worthwhile for Toronto to get. I did find this a little interesting. I wrote an article about how he could come to Toronto, and Jim mentioned it. I think the problem when I write like trade proposal articles is I'm still in Kyle Dubas's mind. You know what I mean? Like I'm still thinking how he would do it with the retention and the prospects and the picks. But what would Brad Treliving give up for him? Some people are saying Nylander. Some people say Liljegren has the quarterback of that deal. So kind of a reverse question for you guys. If Toronto did do it, what player on their roster do you think would be gone for him? Because I think that's the deciding factor and if they should do it.
Interesting. Jim, you want to
there's a lot of
take a first crack at that?
Yeah, sure. There's a lot to consider here, right? Like, what do you know about Nylander? Is he sticking around? Is he told you he's not sticking around? That's important. What do you know about other players in their situation? Because you're only trading for Tyler Toffoli for one more year, right? He's got 1 year left on his deal, and it's a pretty good number. But if he's not going to stay and he's going to test free agency, or you can convince him to sign in Toronto, that changes the optics of a deal, right? So would you trade the number 28 pick? I don't know. Again, you might want to know if he's going to be sticking around a little bit. He seems to have the tendency to sign when he goes places, and he always seems to say that he likes where he's at. This is the first time that I can really recall where Tyler Toffoli has seemed to indicate that he doesn't want to be where he is. And so that's probably an indicator, right? So if you can get him on an extension and say Nylander's not going to go, I wouldn't go 1 for 1, but you could certainly consider those as the centerpieces of some sort of deal, right? So I could see it, but you need to know what's going on with both sides, right? What's happening with Toffoli and what's happening with the players that you have.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's going to be interesting to see what that price would be. Obviously, it does seem like a good match for the Maple Leafs, whether it is Dubas or Treliving involved, because even I understand there would probably be a logjam on the right side because you have Marner, you have Nylander and Toffoli, who is the right wing, but Nylander can play the left side. So I wonder if maybe putting him on the off wing may still be a option for him if he's still willing to, give that a try if he's able to, because I believe he is a right shot. So maybe you'd work on those one-timers a little bit and then have that dynamicism with, Tavares, Nylander, and Toffoli as, a potential second line. But in terms of a trade proposal, I mean, you look back at what the Calgary Flames gave up for him, it really wasn't a whole lot. They gave up Tyler Pitlick, who's, kind of a depth forward at this point. Emil Heineman really hasn't bursted onto the scene, and they gave up a first-round pick as well as a fifth. So I think those draft picks are going to be key. I know the Maple Leafs do have a first and fifth in this year that would leave them with only one pick, and I believe that would probably be a 7th rounder. And, you're the Maple Leafs with kind of an average prospect system. You want to try and add more depth in as possible. Maybe you could try and leverage in the picks from next year. Maybe that could try and work out, but I think knowing how deep of a draft this is, you may need to offer up 28. But if you can move on from a depth forward, but then again, a lot of the depth forwards are, UFAs. You don't really have a whole lot. Would Calle Yarncroke be the option to trade out of here for him to go back to Calgary? Don't see. I would probably hang on to Timothy Liljegren. I'm very high on him, and hopefully at some point he could burst onto the scene, but a lot of working pieces. And if you do have to give up an average prospect, there are a lot of, B-level prospects that you could try and move on from that may not have a chance in the future with this team.
You got to remember too, you got to know what Calgary's mentality is around their entire team, right? Mm-hmm. Like if they're not sure that Lindholm's going to stay and they don't think that Backlund's going to stay and they know Toffoli's leaving and Hannafin's leaving, I mean, they're like one piece away from a rebuild. So if that's the case, do you want players back, right? Yeah. If you are going to rebuild, you probably don't. You probably just want as high a pick as you could possibly get. But if you are not going to rebuild, if you're looking to move all these pieces out and get players back that will contribute right away, the nice thing about Toffoli is he's always going to be a bargain, right? He's the kind of player that's never going to ask for too much money. He always seems to sign for less than we all think he's going to sign for. It's just like a shocker every summer when he signs. You're like, really? They got him at that number? So that's what you're going to get in Toronto if he comes over and he resigns. He's going to sign for less than you think he's probably worth. And if you're moving out a player like Nylander, because Calgary's like, no way, there's no way I'm not going to trade him unless I'm getting something back that's useful right away, you're basically cutting that salary in half because Nylander's going to easily be a $9 million player. So it'll be very interesting depending on what Calgary's mentality is around their team in the next month.
And if the players still continue to move on or show interest that they want out of there, you might as well just hit the full on rebuild button and start from scratch so you can get as many picks and top prospects as you can. It's interesting that you brought up, Toffoli signing less for what we think that he might go for, because he signed a 3-year deal with the LA Kings from 2017-18 to 2019-20. He was at a $4.6 million cap hit. But, he signed for just slightly under that, 4 years with the Montreal Canadiens, and obviously in the final year, 4.25. So maybe if he does ask for less, or maybe if you could get him around the same range, that'll probably benefit the Maple Leafs big time if you do keep him long term.
Yeah, I remember he was shocked when he signed that deal in Montreal, because that was around the time that a lot of those big contracts were happening, and then he just sort of snuck in under the radar and signed for way less. I was like, really? That's a good deal for them.
Absolutely. And sticking with the Toffoli situation, obviously it was reported early on or in the last day or so from David Pagnotta at the fourth period where, the Maple Leafs are shopping the 28th pick for immediate help along with other, draft possibilities. Spencer, I'm coming to you first because you did write that, trade proposal piece in regards to acquiring Toffoli. If you were, in that situation right now, would you offer up the 28th pick right now?
I feel like he's worth a first round pick, but I feel like Toronto could use the first round pick to get another piece long term. Like, for example, one that comes to mind is Tom Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, if Washington's actually shopping him, I feel like he'd be almost a perfect fit for what Toronto needs. As for Tyler Toffoli, I mean, like my proposal was I believe a second next year or a third next year, and Nick Robertson. And I keep going back to the Nick Robertson thing because if he can stay healthy, he's only 21. So it's a win-win for any team to get him. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, a lot of people are saying he could go for a first round pick. And another team that comes to mind that would offer that, or one of them would be like a St. Louis. Like if they're really doing this big deal that they're getting today and they want to be back in contention, they've got 3 picks. So yeah, I feel like he could go for a first round pick, but I don't think Toronto should trade their first round pick for him.
Interesting. Jim, would you consider moving that 28th pick for immediate help if it did involve Toffoli?
If, like I said before, he's extended, yeah. Like I'm one of the few people maybe who's a big believer in, like, I don't really care what you're picking at the draft if what you're moving is going to help you in whatever window that you're in, right? So if you're Toronto and you're like, I got 2 years to win this thing, trade all your picks. I don't care, right? Like, some people would say, don't ever do that. You got to have depth. You got to keep building for what a lot of GMs aren't going to be there long enough. Now, True Living is going to be there for a while, but you got to move what you got to move to get what you need to get. And if Toffoli's available and you can get him extended and you've got a player that's going to help you in that window to win for the next 3 years or so, then yeah, I would do it. Right. But I'm also not of the belief that you always have to hang on to your first round picks. Like in Edmonton, Ken Holland has done that a ton. He just very rarely ever trades that pick. Right. I'm not really the type of person that's like, no, you got to hang on to that pick no matter what. Like, trade it if you need to, but make sure whatever you're getting is worth getting it back. And you're not getting Toffoli, and then all of a sudden Toffoli's gone at the end of the season.
Exactly. I think if they do have something in place, that is going to be key. And even so, like, what that dollar value is going to be, because again, Maple Leafs are going to be looking to sign, they still need to sign Austin Matthews, William Nylander. There's also Mitch Marner and John Tavares the following season after that. So you have to worry about the long term. And if, again, the only way it'll work out is if Toffoli signs for, a little bit less or what he's making right now. But then again, considering it was a 73-point season where the Flames were not that great, you have to wonder, maybe he could price himself out of Toronto's range, and maybe the whole entire Toffoli deal may not come to fruition if it's going to be for 1 year rental. But then again, you may get the rental right now for a full year as opposed to half a season. That could be worth it. Who knows at this point? Obviously I wish we were inside the Maple Leafs war room, inside the mind of Brad Living at this point right now, because you still don't get a sense of what's happening in Toronto right now, because it seems like everything is their cards are so close that they don't want to leak any information out, even like a little rumor or something like this. There's no substance to it, but it's still an interesting situation because of the possibilities and what could happen.
Well, then think about this too. Sorry to cut you off. Like, there's a couple things that you
no.
got to weigh into this that might be like way off in the distance, but are still sort of important. Like, if you're a GM that likes to talk to your star players and you go to Austin Matthews and say, "Hey, I've got this opportunity to maybe bring Toffoli in. What do you think about this?" And he says, "Yes, absolutely. I'd love to do it." That's one thing. Then you go, "Okay, great." The other option is, though, if Austin Matthews is really thinking about how much money he can make, the 28th overall pick, if you're going to pick a forward at that spot, it's going to be pretty cheap for the next little while, which means more money for Austin Matthews. So depending on what he's thinking and what's going on in their own, like the whole overall of this core four and how much money they can possibly squeeze out of the Toronto Maple Leafs, if you have Toffoli and you have to give Toffoli some money, that's less for Marner, that's less for Matthews, that's less for Nylander, it's less for all those guys. So they might not be keen about that idea. Right. So it's kind of, you have to go, okay, well, really, what are these guys all? It's so much to weigh if you're looking at this sort of thing in your true living, because you just don't even know yet. I mean, like you said, we're not in the room, so we don't know, but we don't seem to know from the outside exactly where Matthews is. We've heard that he wants to sign, but we still don't know for how much and for how long. So that's going to be important. Like if he gets and brings in Toffoli, then all of a sudden signs Toffoli for like $5.5 million for 3 years. Austin Matthews is going to go, okay, well, where's my money? Right? Like you never know. So it could have consequences if you make the wrong choice.
Speaking of signing or dealing with contracts with the core four, another report by Elliot Freeman, he brought this notion up on the 32 Thoughts podcast, which is just his take and his opinion. He said that, quote, if the Leafs were going to take their run at Nylander and that he's very curious to see what's going to happen if he's extended by July 1st. Obviously, we know what the big prize is in all of this, and that's getting Austin Matthews' extension done first. But if the Maple Leafs do have something set in stone right now, Spencer, I'm going to come back to you as well. If they do have something in place, obviously he really can't sign before July 1st. Same thing with Matthews. He can't sign it until July 1st, and then that's when the extension period can happen. If the Maple Leafs do have something in place with Nylander, if they're succeeding in signing Austin Matthews, let's say it's 8x8. Everyone is throwing that number around because everybody seems to be doing jersey numbers with their contracts right now. So if it's 8x8 or somewhere in that, $8 to $9 million range, is that still something worthwhile that you got to consider if you want to bring Nylander back in the fold?
Yeah, long term. I struggle to find out the reason why people are stressed about this season, though. Like, I understand you have Matthews and Nylander, and they're extendable as of July 1st, but their number for next year. You know what I mean? So if Nylander doesn't want to re-sign, you still have a little bit of time to re-sign him after next year. But if you don't, you still have time to trade him. You don't need to panic so quick and trade him this offseason. But I think 8x8 would be a good number, but for some reason, something tells me he's just going to go like double digits. Like I feel like he's going to ask for 10x8, which at that point, it might be too much for Toronto. But then at the same time, going back to what Jim said, maybe Tavares will be aware because he knows the guys. Maybe he'll take less if he does come back. Maybe he'll take 1 or 2 million, 3 million because he's already made so much. You know what I mean? Maybe he'll take that hometown discount, which will even things out. But yeah, I for some reason, something tells me that it's going to be $10 million.
Jim, even if it is in that, 7-figure deal where he is asking 10 million, is it possible that the Maple Leafs can still restructure something where it's still a little bit less now? And then, in years 2, 3, 4, if the salary cap goes up and what you have with Mitch Marner, John Tavares taking less, is that something still possible in keeping Nylander in the fold with everything?
Yeah, it depends on where the cap goes, right? If the cap jumps like people are thinking it's going to jump, then you have all sorts of room to do lots of stuff. Especially if Tavares, when his contract is up, is kind of like, like I envision the same thing for like an Anze Kopitar in Los Angeles, right? Like he ain't going nowhere. And he's got like 1 year left. And when he comes down from that massive contract that he's going to have, he's going to be very, very affordable for the Kings. And they're going to keep him around. He'll be a depth center. That's probably what will happen with Tavares. So when the cap jumps and you've got some of these players coming down, from reality, because I think Tavares is way overpaid, you're going to have people like maybe more room for Marner and Matthews contracts, things like that. Nylander's an interesting situation, though, because I've seen Philip Forsberg as a comparison in Nashville, where he's an $8.5 million player, very similar style of players. But I'm with Spencer. I think that Nylander's probably going to ask for a lot more. That those contract extensions talks in the past have been somewhat contentious, and there's always been an issue there. I think Nylander thinks he's a really, really good player. And I think on other teams, people will realize very quickly how good William Nylander actually is. The biggest argument is that he doesn't always show up. So you don't get the full 100% William Nylander that you're expecting. And if he did that every single game, you'd be like, wow, this guy's incredible. So he could get a lot. And I think there's going to be a team that is willing to give it to him. So my take is, I don't know, of all the players on this roster, he might be the least of the four core to really be married to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Like, I think he'd be the one player he's like, no way, I'm testing this thing. Like, I'm going to market. I'm going to see what I can get. And if it's the most money and it happens to be, Washington, or it happens to be Detroit, or it happens to be Anaheim, I'm taking it. So, like, I don't know what he's thinking, but for some reason, I get the impression that could be the thing. Nylander's really good, but if you're going to move anybody, it's probably him.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I wonder if he's starting to get all the leverage right now, because back-to-back 80-point seasons, like you did mention, there are points where he does not show up, and then you have to have Keefe as a head coach motivate him and get him going, even though at this stage, at his age right now, he should know that he needs to be consistent day in and day out. Yeah, I wonder if he does maybe start to price himself out, because let's face it, I really do think that Toronto is probably going to still hang on to Marner, although there's still the trade speculation where if you got to move one, who are you going to move, Marner or Nylander? That's still going to be a big debate or hot topic right now. But in terms of his, like what I mentioned before about his structure, it's very possible that he could probably still take maybe $7 million in the first year or two, and then when the salary cap goes up, if they restructure it that way, where it could be an 8, 9, maybe 10, it can't go up, because that's how they did it when he first signed in 2018-19. It was 10.2 with the cap hit at that point, but that was only for half a season. He already missed half, and I think that compensated for what he missed, and I think they just gave him a little bit more that season to not necessarily appease him, but you know what? You got your 10 million this time around. We're going to bump you down after that. It's going to be 6.9. Show us more what you can do. And I think he's proven now that he is that 8, 9, maybe $10 million man, where, you know what, he has the right to earn a pay raise. Players do that. Players have the right to do that every single time. It is interesting to see what's going to happen, because 6.9 is a really good bargain, but even if William Nylander is still making between 8 and 9, that's still a big bargain for a player that has shown consistently that he can be an 80-point guy, 40-goal type player. So we'll see what happens, because, all the fun begins July 1st, free agent or extension. So we're definitely going to be keeping an eye on that.
Well, and he'll argue in his, sorry, Spencer, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Jim.
No, I was just going to say he and his agent will absolutely 100% argue that he's going to be worth a certain percentage of the cap. Right. So when that cap goes up to a certain number, whether it's 87 million or whatever, and they say, okay, well, based on comparables around the league, I'm, worth 13 to 15% of the cap. He's going to argue for that. Right. So he's going to want that value. And I don't know, can the Toronto Maple Leafs afford it? Like, that's a lot of money. So it'll be interesting, and he'll probably get it from somebody.
Absolutely. And it's worth noting that both Nylander is represented by Louis Gross, who is the same agent as Johnny Gaudreau. And we all know how that played out. Johnny Gaudreau is making 9.75. So I think maybe if you're probably Nylander, you're probably thinking, hey, you know what? Maybe I'm in that same realm as Johnny Gaudreau, 9.7, under the 7 digits, but we'll see what happens. Spencer, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I was just going to say the benefit to that with, like, if they've restructured the contract so he makes, like, say, $7 million for the next 2 years, and then 10 would be the way that they could balance it is that the AAV is only 7 or 8, because that's what counts towards the cap, right? And then in total dollars or real cash, he's getting 10 or 11 million. And I actually, on my own podcast, I mentioned Anaheim as a team that William Nylander would go to, because they could afford to pay him. Like, depending on who they get this year, obviously, Fantilli or Carlson might ask for a lot, but I just feel like Anaheim will be a team that's going to be ready to spend dollars in the next couple of years.
Oh, and they'll want to, right? They'll be super motivated. They're going to get the number 2 overall pick here. So they're going to have a player right around when Nylander's ready to go, who could be in the top, 25 in league scoring. Like, who knows, right? Like, they're going to want some pretty good players to surround whoever they pick. And it's probably going to be Fantilli, but like, if that's the case, they're going to need somebody to play with them.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, a lot of people are saying Nylander is going to get like 8x8 or whatever, but there could be a chance that he takes 2 or 3 years with Toronto, stays with Toronto while they're in the competitive window, and then after like 2 or 3 years leaves, and then Anaheim or whatever team that's up and coming could be an attraction for him.
Interesting
He'll get more money
scenario.
that
And
way.
yeah, no, absolutely interesting scenario. And you know what? Whether it's Fantilli and Nylander or Fantilli and Zegras, that is definitely going to be fun to watch, especially if you're an Anaheim Ducks fan. Before we move on to the second part of our show, here is a quick word from the hockey writers.
Interested in writing for the Hockey Writers? If you have experience writing about hockey, are passionate about the sport, and are looking to take your writing to the next level, the Hockey Writers could be the place for you. Here at THW, you will have the opportunity to hone your craft at one of the world's largest and most respected hockey publishers. You will have control over what you write, be able to seek out media credentials, and be supported by a large network of writers and editors. Plus, you'll get paid for doing it. If you're interested and want to know more about team openings and requirements, please visit the Write for THW page on the Hockey Writers website. A link to that page is also listed in the description.
And we are back. We talked about, free agency trades because a lot of things happen on July 1st because it is, Christmas in July, or I believe that's the phrase, Christmas in July. It's Christmas 2.0 for hockey fans because, in December, there's, the World Juniors, then there's a trade deadline. Now this, but this is when all the action happens. But before that, it's the NHL draft. And obviously the draft is happening next Wednesday and Thursday, or the following, or depending on when you're watching this, it is happening at the end of the month, Wednesday, the 28th and 29th of June. And obviously the Maple Leafs don't have a lot of draft capital at this point. They only got 3 picks. The first rounder that they got from the Boston Bruins, that they got from the Washington Capitals in the Dmitry Orlov trade, and then the Maple Leafs reacquired that for Rasmus Sandin. Massive trade tree going on there. And then a 5th round pick and a 6th round pick. And a lot of these picks have been traded away. Obviously, it's a less than ideal situation, but the Maple Leafs have been in this situation before. And Jim, in 2021, they only had 3 picks, 2nd round, 5th round, and a 6th round.
Yeah.
And they made those picks count. Obviously, we're seeing the benefits pay off with Matthew Knies right now. Ty Voigt was another top player in the OHL. And Vyacheslav Peksa, who nobody knew at that point, is starting to burst onto the scenes and being a little bit more competitive and giving the Maple Leafs another homegrown talent in goal. Obviously, 3 picks again this year, similar to 2021. Is their draft strategy just to make each one count if they don't trade down or get other picks in this draft?
Yeah, like if you're asking, do they need to put a big priority or a huge rush on getting more picks? My answer is probably no. If they're going to move the 28th overall pick, then they've got something in the cooker here. Like it's going to be something big. And if they're not, they're going to get a decent player. Like the top 3 is the top 3. The top 10's pretty good. The top 20's better than in most years, right? And even at 28, you're probably going to get a decent pick. Like they picked Matthew Knies at number 57, and look what he's starting to do right now. It's still early, so we don't know exactly what he's going to project to be. But he looks like he's going to be pretty good. So you can get a good player at 28. You can get a potentially impact player in a couple of years at 28. So if you're going to just hang on to that pick, just make sure you nail it. Like get the best. And that's really possible in this draft because it is that deep. So if you're going to do that, go for it. But do you need to and in this year, you're going to have to consider, you're going to have to give up the farm to get into the first round. And you're going to have to give up even more to get higher in the first round than you might already be. So I don't know that I would be too worried about it. You can walk away from a draft with only 3 picks and do pretty well. And you got to know the percentages of those late round picks anyway are kind of low. So you do what you can to make that most out of that 28th overall pick. And if you can't, swing for the fences and try to get yourself something that's going to help you in the next couple of years, because that's really the window to win here.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point about trying to move the farm system right now. So I think now is like a good point where they start to analyze who they know has a good chance to be impact players, whether it's in a depth role or higher up down the line, and who isn't. Obviously, I believe Semyon Argachisev is one player that is moving on back to Russia where maybe there's just no fit for him here. Spencer, obviously the Maple Leafs made every pick count in 2021. do you project the same sense happening right now where they still go with, the mindset of drafting high-end skill, smarts, IQ, everything like that?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure the mindset of drafting for Brad Treliving, but Wes Clark has the Kyle Dubas mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And if you listen to Kyle Dubas' press conference the other day, or media availability, he said that Pittsburgh's idea is going to go with the best available. Typically, that's what they've done. I mean, based on other aspects, but like Ty Voigt, probably the best player available at the time, and that worked. I just hope that Toronto actually goes with best available as well as on the back end. Like, there's obviously going to be some guys in the later ends of the draft that could turn out to be depth penalty killers or whatever, and that's what Toronto needs, because we've tried to patch holes for so long, and I just hope that, like, Brad Treliving's always built defense out, so I hope that he can instill that mentality, and they don't just go pick 3 forwards or 2 forwards and a goalie, because we have that. We need more the bigger bodies on the back end. Like, some people say Zadorov is what they want. Well, I mean, there's a couple options on the back end in the later rounds for that big body, right?
Absolutely. In those later rounds, that's where you start to draft for the depth because of everything that's available in the first few rounds. And, this time around, obviously the first round is absolutely deep. You get still first round talent in the second round, and even possibly second round talent in even the third or fourth round. And, this was going to be my last question, but if they do acquire, let's say 1 pick or 2 picks as a third or fourth rounder, who is one player, if you could think of one at the top of your head, an ideal candidate that could be within range, or someone that, could fit the mold of, a key depth piece down the line? Jim, who do you think?
Okay, rephrase that question for me. So are you asking what would happen if they're going to move the 28 pick, what player they're moving it for? Is that what you're asking? If
they were able to get a mid-round pick, like a third, fourth, fifth, okay, who is one target that kind of stands out to you?
Like that they're trading, that the Toronto Maple Leafs are moving?
That they would take with that pick.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. You know what? If I'm Toronto, here's my draft strategy going into this thing. And this may not answer the question directly like you're asking it, but here's what I would do if I was Brad Treliving. Now, he's not going to be at the table, but this is the mandate that I would give everybody who is sitting at the table. Be as flexible as you can possibly be on draft day. Because what's going to happen here is you're going to have 1 of 2 scenarios paint themselves out. There's going to be a lot of movement. There's going to be a lot of players, and we've seen it today. There's already been trades today. I have a feeling there's going to be a ton of offers available. So if you start moving picks prior to the draft, you're either giving away the leverage that you have to make a deal on that day, or you're kind of doing the deal before you necessarily need to, because I think the best offers are going to come on the draft floor in that first round. I also think if you can't get a player, you're going to wind up going, okay, I can move the 28th pick and I can move down because somebody's desperately wanting to get into the first round. I can trade this 28, go like 2 spots down and pick up a third rounder or something like that. So I think the draft strategy, with whether it's players or depth pieces or picks or anything like that, is just to go into that draft as flexible as you can possibly be and just watch what everybody's doing and wait for someone to panic, because somebody will. Somebody's either going to want to move up in the draft, they're going to dump a player that they couldn't trade earlier. And so when it comes to like player picks and who you're going to get there, it's really tough to know that, because we have no idea who's going to draft when and where and what they're going to be looking at, because this draft is so all over the board in terms of who's available. So be as flexible as you possibly can humanly be, because I think something's going to present itself within minutes of you making any pick that you make that day. So I don't know if that answers your question directly, but that's kind of the strategy that I do. Just like be so flexible that you have every option to make a move if you need to.
No, that's absolutely fair, because you don't know exactly where, because one player may be higher up on their draft boards that another team may have lower. So that ability to trade on the spot or, get something going could work to their advantage. It happened quite a bit in 2021 where they did trade down and got the picks that they wanted, like Dennis Hildeby. They got Nikita Grabianka, older players, but it worked in their favor and, necessarily didn't panic, but, they managed to get the player that they want, even though they didn't have a pick. And that is a fair assessment, because that has happened quite a bit in the past, especially in the later rounds.
Well, I was doing my draft preview today, and I was looking at the different lists from different people that were analyzing the draft. I was just shocked at, like, some people had guys at 6th who didn't on another list were like 17, and people had them at like 8 who were like almost in the 20s. Like there's such a gap between what some of these experts are looking at in terms of where people are ranked. Like the top 5 is the top 5, and Mitchkoff might be the one X factor here. We don't know where he's going to go. He could fall. He could stay in the top 5. We're not really sure. Everybody else is just everywhere, right? So like you could on your list have somebody at 6 who isn't on somebody else's list until 16. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, and you're the one that had him at 6, but he's still there at 16, you're doing everything you can to get that 16 pick, right? Like you're just
absolutely.
So it's so volatile that day is going to be crazy. It's going to be awesome though.
Absolutely. Spencer, if the Maple Leafs managed to acquire a mid-round pick, who is one target on your mind that you would like to take if they acquire that pick?
So the hypothetical trade that I had for this to happen is similar to what Jim said. Someone wants to move up. First round, you try and get like a second and a third from them. In the third round, it would be Jakub it's coming to me.
Dvorak.
Yeah, that's it. 6'5", like 205 pounds. He's that. I feel like would be a homegrown. Not that Justin Hall wasn't, but he'd be like that. He's just seems the way that he plays and what I've read about him is like he's like what fans thought Justin Hall would be. You know what I mean? Like he can clear the front of the net. There's also I forget how to pronounce his last name. It's like Christian Kostadinsky.
Yep.
Yeah, in like the 6th round, I believe, from Sweden. And he seemed to be that same style player. And that's what I mean about like if they could pick the best available defenseman to help them in a few years, like those type of guys would be maybe not the best skill wise, but the best for what they need. I didn't really look too much into the 2nd round. I just wanted to throw in a hypothetical. And also another player kind of just so would be Kwokan.
Yes. That is a good one because he was very underrated and he was passed over and he had a fantastic season with Fargo Force in the USHL.
Yeah. So
interesting.
I know I said that they don't need forwards, but I mean he might be a Ty Voigt style.
Absolutely. No, definitely great picks. And interesting to note that I do have Christian Kostadinsky as a late 4th. I know it's very unorthodox to have, a very defensive, bruising defenseman kind of with that style that he plays with. But I've seen it. I've seen him play, and it's just I love that kind of throwback player. And speaking of a throwback player, I kind of have 2 in mind if they do have those mid-round picks. One is Dylan McKinnon from the Halifax Mooseheads. Very steady in his own end, but he tested very well at the Kubota Top Prospects game where he posted the best 30-meter forward skate and second best 30-meter forward skate with the puck, as well as good times in the backward skates with the puck. I think that he has not necessarily good offensive upside, but it can be a factor if his game develops properly. But the defensive game, the gap control, the defensive mindset, I love every bit of that. And the same thing goes with Quentin Burns. I think he's another underrated name heading into this draft. Again, more of a traditional style defenseman, but again, the offensive game is starting to come around. If they're able to draft like all these mid-round depth pieces, that is going to be pretty big if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs. Moving on to our final question. This could be a very short one, and we have gone back and forth about whether we should keep the 28th pick, move the 28th pick. This is kind of like a very rapid fire kind of question. Spencer, draft day, keep or trade the 28th pick?
I think win now, you trade it.
Interesting. Jim, keep or move the 28th pick?
I trade it if somebody comes to me like desperately seeking a move. And if not, I take the pick. But I absolutely hold on to it till the final moment, and I wait for my phone to ring and go, okay, what are you going to give me? Right. And if that's the case, then you make the trade. But if that doesn't happen, then you just make the pick.
Absolutely. No, I tend to agree with both of you. I personally, I would take the pick because, considering how deep of a draft this is, and we did do a writer's mock, and I am happy with the Maple Leaf selection that I made for that writer's mock. But like both of you said, if you're winning now, if there's a deal that just wows you or blows you out of the water, even for a late round pick, there may not be high value, but considering how deep this is, you're still getting a top 6, top 4 defensive talent later on in this draft, and teams would still want that. So you're probably using that to your advantage. And again, if I would keep the pick and take the player that I want, but if there's something big, then yeah, move it and trying to add right now for immediate help.
Well, I think you're going to see a lot of willingness from teams. Like, I wouldn't say the Ryan Johansson trade today was big, but they retained half of his salary. Like, he went from $8 million to $4 million. So if somebody comes to you and you're Toronto and you've got the 28th pick and they're going to go, I'll give you this guy and I'll keep half the money. And that guy's pretty good. And that guy was making like $6 million. I mean, all of a sudden you've got a really solid piece for your roster that's going to help you in the next couple of years for half price. Like, you got to consider it, right? Like, if those types of deals just pop out of nowhere because somebody either wants that pick or they're just actively looking to dump salaries so they do something else or get open on free agency day, you got to look at all those options, right? So if those types of deals start presenting themselves to you, man, you better have a pick you can trade. And so if you do, I would pull the trigger on it for sure.
Absolutely. And for the Colorado Avalanche to get that kind of deal back, like, that sheds a lot of money off the Nashville Predators to do a lot more in free agency. And that was a smart move by Barry Trotz, who's already winning me over as, the Preds GM, because he's doing a fantastic job already. I know
he's not even technically the GM yet.
Exactly. Like, he's not even the GM. He's still making these moves, and it's great moves and great ideas that he's having right now. Because you basically throw off Johansson off the books right now. You're still retaining $4 million, but would you rather still keep him in the fold with his full contract, or what? To be honest, I think that's actually a kind of a good move right now, considering where they were. And I just want to get the final number up here.
Well, I saw it too. Like, I don't know if they were considering buying him out, but if you were going to buy him out, it was $10.66 million.
It's more expensive. Yeah.
Yeah. It would have cost you more money over a longer period of time with dead cap space, no player. And now you've $8 million over 2 years. Yes. $4 million sucks. You don't want to retain that if you don't have to, but I don't know what he's cooking. Like, he's clearly got something going on, and maybe next year if the salary cap jumps, it's not huge, but like, yeah, I don't think you want 4 years of dead cap space if you were going to buy him out. Like, if that's the case, I don't know if they were, but I'm guessing they might. But think about it.
$4 million for the next 2 years. Obviously, you'd probably get the sense that maybe they are hitting, kind of a soft rebuild, especially with all the picks that they've accrued in the next 2-3 years. You could get a sense that, yeah, they could probably handle the $4 million for the next 2 years, even though that Johansson's out their books, and it frees up for more players to come in and make that immediate impact, or some sort of an impact that gives them hope for the future. That about does it for this episode of Maple Leafs Lounge. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check out all of our amazing content with the Maple Leafs team over at the Hockey Writers. Jim, Spencer, and I, we're throwing out content out there like it's Halloween candy. Great stuff from both of you. Obviously, a lot more coming up with the draft, trade speculations, free agency. A lot of great info from there. A lot of great info and analysis from our entire Hockey Writers writing staff. Check out the draft guide. That is coming up very shortly. Great insight in terms of profiles, rankings, top 10s, you name it. We have it over at the Hockey Writers. That is it for this episode. For Jim Parsons and Spencer Lazary, I'm Peter Baracchini, and we'll see you next time on the Maple Leafs Lounge.